let's see. All right, so that should be recording.
Perfect.
So I think this main kind of meeting is going to be about the officers. I think this will probably go a little bit faster since we've already kind of dealt with some aspects of it when we were talking about the board. So I guess we can just hop right into it. I don't know if anybody has any general questions about it or anything like that, but if not, I think we could just go ahead and get started.
I was curious to see the results and see what people's feedback about the board was before.
Oh, right. Thank you.
Yeah, so we can make sure we don't make the same mistakes in the officers.
Absolutely. So we had 19 responses, which is kind of low, a little lower than it was for the mission statement ratification. But, you know, still a good number of responses. Everybody felt like they were adequately served by the draft. There was one person who said no about the powers of the board of directors laid out. And we'll get into like why they said that, but otherwise everyone said 100%, including that person, as far as comfortable with the limitations and rules, so the actual substance. We got some good feedback. The main thing I'm thinking is one person was talking about how they didn't want to say general powers and instead use duties or responsibilities. I honestly don't know if we can get away with that. Specifically because it's legal jargon and it might need to be a specific word. But other than that, you know, they were hoping that it could be put in a Google Doc. I'm not really sure how we would do that. And still like link it to the form, but we could try and look into, you know, that. It might just be that we need to get one of those add-on things. And then
could we just provide like a copy link to the Google Doc, the working doc that we have?
Yeah, we might be able to do that.
It just we could change the permissions to comment only.
Yeah.
So that way they can't edit it.
Okay. And that way maybe we can do like a copy paste, actually have it in there, but also have the link in case they need that kind of sectioning out. And then the other thing was 5 and 7 are similar. They kind of have to be, but they did suggest that we say something a little more explicit about referring to temporary vacancies as opposed to permanent vacancies in section 7. So that's something we could look into as well. Yeah. And if we look at section 5 and 7, this is section 5 specifically is about unanticipated vacancies opening up. There will essentially be a special election. Section 7 is vacancies may be filled through the special election process. Vacancies will run the course of the previous member's term. We could probably take that up more with a legal person and see like, how do we, you know, how can we get away with combining that? Or is it advisable to combine those two? My personal thought is we could just say, take vacancies will run the course of the previous board member's term and put it here, you know, but. I think other than that, those are all the comments. Yeah, those were all the comments. As far as speaking a language other than English, we had 3 people who said actually, yeah, it would translate well. So that's good to know.
What does it mean by translate well?
I kind of left it up to that person because I don't want to be too didactic with that, but like, it's kind of like, when you get into translations from legal jargon, sometimes it just doesn't make any sense. It's just like a bunch of assemblages of words. But we've been trying to write it pretty clear cut. And I just want to check and see, you know, if anybody is bilingual or multilingual in their, you know, brain, are they having a moment where they're like, whoa, that's way too long? You know, I also wanted to point this out at the next interim board meeting as well, but we have a lot of followers from Germany. So, and I have high school level German, so it's not great. But I did take it for 4 years, and I will tell you that German is a language that's like really hard to translate because it's just a bunch of clauses attached to clauses attached to, like you can have a paragraph long sentence and it's grammatically correct. So I'm trying to avoid doing that because you can also kind of get away with that in legal jargon as well. So that's basically what I'm kind of asking people is like, is this something that like multilingually is clear, you know, and has a translation? I know I have been frustrated before with like trying to find, my mom especially has been frustrated before with trying to find like parallel words in Spanish to help my father and father-in-law understand like contracts and stuff. So that's mostly what I mean. I didn't get too specific with it though. We also added the function to say I don't speak a different language, so we had more people kind of take that. And then as far as membership goes, we've got a good number of people that came in through Instagram. A couple of people came in through Discord too, so I'm glad that we've been sort of promoting it there. That might be something that we want to continue doing in the general announcements part of the Discord. But yeah, I think, is there anything specific that y'all want to talk about when it comes to those results?
I was wondering, and I don't know if this is possible, if there's a way to have it just like ping you that email to let you know that you completed the survey. Because I couldn't remember by the third time I was being reminded if I had completed it or not. And there was no, but I wasn't sure if that would impact people's like anonymity or not.
Yeah, so in order to get that email, from what I understand about Google Forms, you would have to basically give us your email.
Darn.
And that would kind of get in the way of that anonymity. I don't know if we could like get around that with the MailChimp. So that might be something that I bring up at the next interim board meeting to ask Stephanie or Ruben if you happen to know. I don't know anything about MailChimp, so.
I haven't had a chance to work with it yet.
Okay.
With Stephanie and I haven't talked about it yet.
So I'll make a
I've been
note
busy.
to bring that up. Sorry, I interrupted you. I'll make a note to
Oh, you're
bring
fine.
that up.
Yeah, I
next
didn't want
time.
to not vote, but I also did not want to accidentally vote twice.
Yeah, that's a real concern. We can look around at that a little bit more.
I guess we would call that like confirmation emails for votes.
Yeah, I think that'd be a good way to say it. It's also, I think it just gets lost somewhere in my head when I'll see it on Instagram and then I'll see it in an email, and something about that throws me off every time.
I understand. It's very much like, I mean, I voted on something,
Yeah.
you know, but which one? So I totally get that. It's especially going to get wild because we're going to be saying like, hey, vote on this draft. And then we're going to say, hey, vote on this final document, you know.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to have essentially the same name or same purpose. So
What have I voted on?
yeah. So I'm hoping maybe MailChimp will be able to help with that.
MailChimp does have a lot of features. I haven't worked with it in years, but I do remember just thinking like, there's a lot that I should learn about this. There's a lot that this does that I'm not doing.
Yeah, I was looking at it with Stephanie when we were going over like the tasks involved in doing mailing, and it was like wild. I was like, whoa, we don't even have to like design a footer technically, maybe. I mean, we can, and we can put the image in, but like we don't have to put in the links and we don't have to put in, you know, our social media
Yeah.
specifically. Like it was really cool. And I'm sure it can do a whole lot more than just make an email, you know?
Yeah.
And I think it would be really good to have that kind of hooked up in multiple places so that they're getting the same, essentially, the same like consistent feedback. Because right now there's a lag with a lot of things. So, because we're doing it manually. Was there anything anybody else wanted to talk about as far as these results? Okay. So with the results that we have, I guess, do y'all want to does someone, anyone really, it can be me too, but does somebody want to go back in and kind of make those adjustments to certain areas? I don't think we can change general powers. I think that might need to be like legalese, has to be that phrase. But we definitely could like do a link to the Google Doc next time. And then I think 5 and 7, maybe combining those. What do y'all think about those? And would anybody be willing to take on that responsibility?
I can jump on that.
Cool. Okay, so Ruben will be taking on that. And then those seem like pretty minor edits, but like, I don't know, if you want a second pair of eyes on it, let me know before we send out the next vote.
Sure.
Okay.
Looking at it right now.
Okay.
I mean, it seems kind of like an easy fix, to be honest.
Right. I kind of thought so too.
It's it's going to be literally like a maybe cut and paste job.
Yeah.
But I'll change the wording and the numbering around for sure,
Okay.
because that will definitely change up the section numbering.
Yeah, that's true. And then other than that, I don't think there's any actionable items with this vote other than, you know, once the revision is done, putting it out again. So for ratification. Which can be something that Kay and I format. Sorry, I'm saying so much. I have like a little bit of a sore throat still. And it's like a weird self-conscious thing to do. So I think with that, we can probably close this if that's okay with everybody. Okay, cool. And then hop right into the officers section of the bylaws. Section 1 lays out what the actual like composition of officers will be. The original plan was to have regional representatives. So I'm wondering, you know, are we still on board with that? Do we want to kind of change the terminology so that we're not really talking about regions in the same way? Especially because we have so many people who are following us abroad. There is a part of me that's like regional might not be the right word, because then we end up in that weird situation where we have to like have a region that's just international, you know, or potentially have a region that's Europe, and like printmaking is going to be different in different parts of Europe, you know, and especially different if we just have an international team, you know. So what do y'all think about that?
If it's not going to be a region, what are some other good words for it that you were thinking?
About guild representatives.
Just taking that out entirely and just like not making the representatives as specific.
Yeah, potentially. We could also say member representatives. That kind of gets us to emphasize the fact that like these officers are members first, representatives second. I don't know. There's a part of me that likes having the regions, if we chose to just be a US group, which is still on the table, you know, or even just a North American or American group. But there's also that ambitious part of me that's like, no, you know.
Zone representative sounds very cute.
Yeah,
What was
Kay in the
it?
chat, they wrote time zones. Could we have 2 to 3 people per time zone?
Yeah.
That
Okay.
makes the meetings actually for those groups really, really efficient.
Yes, it really does, because that has been our biggest stumbling block, and I'm sure it's going to get even bigger if we do have, you know, anybody international, especially if it's like, you know, Miranda Metcalf is in Thailand right now.
Mhm.
So that was wild because they're about 12 hours off from us, you know?
Right. It's a different day that they're meeting.
Yeah. So I think that's
I
a
think,
good idea.
yeah, I think
Um,
that's a great idea. And it has a nice name.
should we call them zone representatives, or should we go with that's okay, Kay. We could also widen it by like 5 people. I think what we should do is like a per member in that time zone. You know what I mean? And that might also make people more comfortable with sharing their time zones with us. You know? Because the time zone is wild. Like we did have some people previously who were uncomfortable with sharing their location, but I don't know if they'd have the same concerns with sharing an entire strip of the earth, you know?
Yeah, because that could really put you in some places anywhere from like Nova Scotia to South America.
Yeah. And of course, if we have those people, they'll also speak up with the vote, I hope.
Mhm.
Do we want to say, sorry, I was looking for another word for time zone or zone. And one word that came up that I think is really nice, it was one I was thinking of, was territory. Territory representative.
That might get into like some confusion, especially if we're talking about like people in Puerto Rico or Guam. They might get a little bit like, what do you mean by territory? Because we're in like weird limbo with where we're at as far as our relationship to the United States. So territory might have too much of a connotation for certain groups.
Our country used to be a territory of England, but it would be very hard to meet with British people from the Caribbean.
Yeah.
I was thinking specifically like from like an indigenous like perspective too.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
I think the point you bring up is probably better. Yeah. So
What if we
just
look?
the word I brought up though.
I'm just gonna, this is very corny of me, but I'm just gonna look at the thesaurus.
Yeah, that's literally what I have pulled up right now. I mean, there's area representative, locality representative.
Locality also in like municipal, district are also kind of confusing. And then province for our Canadian people, that might be very confusing.
Zone rep has a really nice ring to it.
Yeah, it does. Maybe we do go with zone then.
Yeah.
Because otherwise it just feels clumsy, I guess is the way to put it.
Yeah.
And I like the idea that we have that for the sake of efficiency and less for the sake of like, I don't know. I feel weird about representation in time zones just because time zones in the US are really long. And so that's, you know, I don't want like the Eastern time zone to just have North Carolinians on it, you know? So we might need to add a stipulation about that. Just saying they should be from and we can be vague too. We can just say they should be from a variety of different places, or working in a variety of different places. But I do like the idea of having zone representatives. All right, so I guess we'll flesh that idea out more as we go along then. So I guess, do you want to go ahead and just start editing with that kind of settled?
Let's go for it.
Okay. So the officers of the organizations shall consist of none of these things. The board's not authorizing anything. And that's not happening either. Cool. While I'm typing this out, what percentages do y'all, well, I guess, how many representatives per members do you think we should kind of aim for?
I think that changes a little bit as the organization grows. For instance, right now, it would be difficult to get representatives in, like, it would be difficult to get more than one or two in any given region, just based on the size of the organization. I think it should be proportional to the membership in some way.
Mm-hmm. So when you say proportional, should we have a percentage or should we have, because what I was thinking was like a ratio, basically, where we have one.
Ratio is better than
every
percentage.
10. Yeah.
Yeah, because a percentage can be half a person at times.
And that gets kind of muddy because it's just like, okay, then do we have, what did we, you know?
Yeah.
And so I think maybe what we should do is something along the lines of, I said 1 to 10, but that's based on the size we have right now. And that could get kind of wild later. Our overall membership with like active members is around 100. So I guess we could take that into account as well. But we'll also have to think about like, what do we do if only one person is in that time zone? You know, are they just
their own
representative? Yeah. Whether they want to be or not.
Yeah, that brings up a good point. If someone is the only person in that zone, would they have to be the representative or could they only be a member?
I think we might want to add like a little clause in here to give them an out if they would like. So if say, I don't know how many time zones are in, I don't know why I'm harping on Germany, but how many are in Germany? But let's say there are 2 and there's only one person on the Western side. And they're like, I really don't want this position. I'll just join with the, you know, Eastern Germans and we'll be fine, you know. That might be something that we do.
So should we have like a minimum? Like if there's, I don't want to put like a specific number right now, but if there's like you need more than 2 people in a zone to, more than one person in a zone to have a representative, or more than 2 people in a zone to have a representative?
Yeah, I think, yeah, I don't have a fast answer to that. What do y'all think?
Kay writes, a time zone could be coupled with another unless someone in the time zone decides to become a rep.
Yeah, I think that that would be a good way to basically give them that out. So maybe we say at least, yeah, Kay also says at least 2 people feels like a good starting point. Yeah, exactly. If there's only one, they could be represented by the nearest time zone. Yeah. So I don't know if that will go right here. I think that's actually probably going to go somewhere else. Let me check real quick. Each little person is outlined. We're actually, so the fun thing about this is we're just going to have one of these, but we are going to have to like really
flesh it out.
Yeah. Okay, so they don't actually have very much information about that here. Probably because it's in with like the individual roles. So maybe we should just go ahead and put that in the officer section. Or should we put it in election?
Probably election,
Yeah.
because that is more about place and like placement of the individual.
Yeah. Okay. Let's do that then. I'm just gonna make myself a note. And so they'll essentially be kind of adopted by that other time zone. Okay. Zone representatives are designated by time zone and may span internationally. No, we're not doing the 2 or more offices by the same person. I don't know if I said that in a very circuitous way, but I just wanted to make it very clear. No officer may act in more than one capacity where the action of 2 or more officers is required. I think we should include that. But I do want to change officer. Like the first time we say officers is fine, but after that, we might as well just say zone representatives. Yeah. Action of 2 or more. Okay. So what else should we put here? Should we, I think probably we should put the percentages here, or the, not percentages, but the ratio here. Have we settled on a number? What number feels good?
I think 1 to 10 is a reasonable start with, you know, with the understanding that we are going to re-review the bylaws at some point and update them. We already talked about that with the last one too, with whenever we were deciding the number of something, and it was just like, if we need to change this, we'll just really nail down the process for amending the bylaws.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. The zone has more than 10 members. It will receive a second. So
Yeah.
like if we have 11, that place will have 2.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how do I phrase that? If the zone has more than 10 members, it will receive a second zone representative. There's a better way for me to phrase this so that it can go into infinity, but I don't know how to make that one succinct sentence without a bunch of legal jargon.
Oh.
Whenever you get to numbers, I've had a bunch of international students, and when you get to the numbers, this amount of this amount of this, then we can do this with that amount and make it just gets very like, what? It's one of English's biggest failings is describing math.
So to clarify,
Mhm.
like a scenario, if 2 zones don't have, if both of them alone don't have enough representatives, but together they make 10, so those 2 zones would be combined to 1 representative, correct?
Yes.
So then if one of those zones, another person entered, so combined they're 11, but
Mhm.
split apart, they're still not 10. So then they would get
A
two
second.
representatives to represent the combined zones.
Yes, but you make a good point. Maybe we should say instead of has more than 10 member or for each 10 members, we should say something along the lines of there will be one zone representative for a group of between 2 to 10. Because I also think if we're at 9, they might as well have their own representative in that area. You know, I don't want it to be such a like hard and fast. So how can we phrase that? There will be one zone representative.
For every zone.
Well,
Oh God, I just had it in my head.
I think I got it. I think I absorbed it through this
Yes.
thing. For every zone that has between, what did we say, 2
2.
and 10?
Kay recommended 8 to 10.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They said, what about like 8 to 10? We could have a range. Yes,
Maybe we
but
should
I'm
go
not.
6 to 10, just to go with that specific example you had before, Ileana.
Mhm.
Because I think when you get to 6, it's like, well, they might as well have their own. But when it's only 5 and there's like another place that has like 3, that might be okay to combine. You know what I mean? I worry about it because of the ethics, especially when we go international. But I'm also like, well, you know, it'll work for some places, but it won't work for others. Like, I'm very sure China takes up a bunch of different time zones, but so does the US. But then we'll have places like England where everybody in England is essentially in one time zone. I don't know if that's true. I'm just guessing. It's relatively small. So I'm trying to think like, okay, how can we, you know, mitigate those discrepancies? I guess what we could say is maybe we go with 7 to 10 as a range. And then if a time zone has more than 10 members, it will receive a second zone representative. Maybe what I should put here is including any members. We need like a verbiage for that process of somebody like kind of taking on somebody from a different time zone.
Another
Not
quick
combined.
question.
Yes, go for it.
Never mind. The zone representatives aren't counted in the number of members, correct?
My immediate instinct is no, but then I'm also like, maybe. No, but then I'm also like, maybe. No, but then I'm also like, maybe. I don't know. What do you all think about that?
Isn't like if it's a zone representative, whether or not they count within that 10 membership? Okay.
So if they become the 11th person, that wouldn't entitle them to a second zone representative?
No, I don't think that should.
Okay.
Yeah, I
That's
think
like my gut. That's my gut.
I think the best way around that, and correct me if I'm like misunderstanding, but I think the best way around that is to say, okay, let's have them count as a member in the total, right? And then every time they pass that, they have to have an election. So it can't just be, I'm going to just add myself to this group so I can be a representative. It's got to be like everyone else has to agree with you on that decision, you know?
It has to make sense to other people is a really good way to keep things making sense.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, y'all. I'm not sure I'm understanding where we went.
This part is really hard. Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
kind of in agreement.
It's a bunch of numbers.
Yeah, I'm also having it.
I think maybe what we should lay out is if a zone has let's just have them be a member, because I think it's important for them to have the ability to say like, okay, let me rephrase this as a term of like an individual going through the process, actually, because I'm also confusing myself. So let's say we're going to name somebody random, Ted. Ted becomes this member in a group that already has a regional representative. Ted is the 11th member. I don't think that first regional representative will lose their position, but I do think now that they've got 11, Ted should probably have some kind of representation as well. So they'll have a special election within that group to nominate the next regional representative. That doesn't necessarily mean it will be Ted. Anybody can go up for that position.
Okay, I think I'm asking a different question,
Okay.
but that is a good point. The question I'm asking is if there are 7 members
Mhm.
in a zone,
Yep.
and one of those members becomes a representative, then would there technically be 6 members?
There'll still be 7 as far as like the board is concerned, as far as the officers are concerned. So like
Okay.
anytime we have to have a census of like, oh, where do we want to hold this next? Let's say we have a conference, right? Where is the most, presence of our members, even if, we'll count the regional representatives as regular members as well, just because they are technically members as well. Does that?
It's like member and
Yes.
rep.
Yeah, that was part of why I was thinking like member representative, but then that also gets into a weird kind of a place where it's like, what does that mean? But I do think maybe we should put that out, like written out as, something clear. So I
Yeah.
will say like for census purposes, zone representatives count as members. I don't know if this is the place to put it. So it's basically like a member with a special role.
Yes.
And then once they're finished being the regional representative for whatever we decide the term limit is, they're just a regular member again.
And we would say the same for a board member too.
Yeah,
Still a member.
exactly. And that the main reason that kind of is different is that all members should be voting on everything. So the real like special power of both of these groups is that they get to propose ideas. That's the special power. But the majority of people who respond still have to be, members who respond still have to be on board with whatever those proposals are. So, and I think it's still good, like we're still voting on things as the interim board or as volunteers, which we're technically, like the volunteers would also be considered officers right now. We're still voting on things. So I think that that's like a good standard to keep up with. I don't think there's anything ethical that we would run into there. Not sure. I don't have arms. Sorry. So including any member, if a zone has more than 10 members, including any members. Oh, I don't remember what this was about. Oh, any members
in
adopted.
the neighboring time zone.
Yeah, what is a good concise verbiage for that? Like, I want to say adopted, but that's not good. That's very specific.
It sounds very loving.
Yeah.
I think including members from adjacent.
Consolidated from adjacent time zones.
Yeah.
That's a good way to put it.
Consolidating is a little less emotional.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I got into the like, this is my print dad kind of brain where I'm like, now I'm adopted. So including any members consolidated from a neighboring time zone. It will receive a second zone representative. I'm also going to say through special election. Okay.
Do we do this for like every 10? So if one has 20 and then it becomes 21,
Mhm.
does that then
Yeah,
get a third?
that's what I was thinking. I think,
So do we write that out as well?
yeah, I think we should. How should we phrase that though? I guess this process
This is literally what
No.
I was thinking just now.
continue for each and
Yeah.
you know. Yeah, I
Uh,
guess 10. Recorded. I guess that means you can also lose a regional representative. But I think maybe that should be something that happens after a term is served. So we're not just pulling the rug out from under somebody.
I have to go now, but I hope y'all have a really nice evening or afternoon wherever you are.
Thank you, you too.
Thank you, Eliana.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. So after a term is served. Okay. Or maybe we take a maybe what would be better is if we just take a census at the end of each termination period for the officers. Because it just occurred to me like that's going to be us eliminating a seat and then adding the seat and then eliminating the seat, you know? That way it's a little bit more organized, so it's not just happening whenever it happens. Does that make sense?
I think it makes sense, and it would also help us kind of decide, hey, we have polled and we see that there's one person in the time zone next to you. Would you guys like to adopt them?
Yeah.
Reach out.
Exactly. You know, and then so maybe that's what we say. Let me change the language where so I guess I just add right here if a zone has more than 10 members at the conclusion of the terms of their representative. I guess I should capitalize representative. Including any members consolidated from a neighboring time zone, it will receive a zone representative, a second zone representative through a special election. And then I think I will redundantly say.
I'm still confused by the verbiage of this sentence.
Which one?
The one you were just working on. Sorry, I'll let you finish.
It's a run-on, that's why.
Okay. Well, I think it's like just the tense.
Okay.
When you're finished, I will go back to it. Let me know when you're ready.
Yes, I'm
Okay.
good. Go ahead.
Okay, if a zone has more than 10 members at the conclusion of the term of their representative, including any members consolidated from a neighboring time zone, it will receive a second zone representative through a special election. I guess I'm confused about conclusion of the terms of their representatives.
I think that might have to be something we go into more at the election phase.
Okay.
But basically just means once it gets close to the end of their term, then we'll start doing another census, you know? I don't know, there's definitely a better way to phrase that, but I'm really trying to avoid getting like super convoluted.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Feel free to like go into that statement and clean it up because I feel like I feel in my brain like it should be broken up, but I don't know where. You know,
In
I
that
want to keep it
specific one.
continuous.
Yeah, in that specific one.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I have it. I'm sure you can tell I have it open right now. I'm on the other side looking as well.
Okay. So other than that, I don't know if there's anything else to add here. We've talked about how many you'll have, what they're called, essentially, which is all they talked about in the other one. May not have any other role within, and that they can't have a role other than member. So you can't be on the interim board and an officer, or not the interim board, the board and an officer. I think that is important to have in there. Is there anything else y'all can think of to put here? It's fine if not, because we can also just keep going and we'll think about things as we get there. Okay. So, oh, everyone. Oh no, you're there. Okay. I was worried for a moment. So I think let's move on to section 2, which is the election and terms. And I actually have to run to the bathroom. So I will be right back, but feel free to go ahead without me.
Time zone, one word or two words?
I'm gonna look that up. I don't want to be wrong
Yeah,
and have
'cause
it
I'm-
recorded for perpetuity.
Yeah, because I was just I'm editing the doc for continuity and I was like breaking it up, but then I kept seeing it in one word, so I wanted to make sure.
It says that it's 2 words.
Okay. Okay,
According to the Wikipedia page for time zones.
great. All right, so election and terms. At one meeting each year, the board of directors shall elect from among so this one should probably, all of these should probably just get deleted. Elect from among the zone representatives. At one meeting each year, the board of directors. I'm not sure what that means, actually. At one meeting each year, the board of directors shall elect from among the zone representatives as the board may have authorized. Hold on, I'm also going to boost the font size of this for its readability. Each officer shall hold office from the first day of the fiscal year or immediately upon election if such election occurs after the first day of the fiscal year until the last day of the fiscal year or until his or her death. I'm going to change that to there. Resignation until their death, resignation, retirement, removal, or disqualification if such occurs before the final day of the next fiscal year or until their successor has been qualified. Until their successor
Have we
has been elected and
decided
qualified.
on like a fiscal year, like when that's going to start? I can't remember if we decided on that or not.
Yeah, off the top of my head, I don't know that.
I think we talked about January.
Matching our fiscal year to the actual year.
Yeah. Always
Not a
drives me
bad
nuts when
idea.
it's not.
But I don't know if it's officially in any like documentation.
Yeah.
And it might be smarter, I don't know, to go with May since that's our goal for incorporation, or June. But we could see.
Yeah, sometimes when you do it in May or you do it in August, it gives off the more academic year vibe.
Yeah.
My only objection.
I definitely understand that too. Pumpkin, get out. Go away. Oh my God. He snuck in here.
Okay. So for the election in terms, one kind of immediate edit that I made was just getting rid of, they're saying shall elect from among the, their verbiage, president, treasurer, blah, blah, blah. And I just changed it to the zone representatives. But I don't think I fully understand what this sentence is referring to.
Oh, they're talking about, so previously they were saying that it would be appointed by the board of directors. That's not happening.
They're being
Um,
elected
yeah.
instead.
So we're instead going to have them elected, but they're going to be elected by the membership. One thing we want to kind of decide is, are they elected? And I have my own opinion, but I want to hear everybody else's. Are they going to be elected from just their zone? Or are they going to be elected by everyone?
I suppose that really depends, doesn't it? Because then that gives one person the right to elect themselves as the one person in their zone.
It's true.
But should they?
But then
Should
at
they
the
have
same
that right?
time, they kind of are the person to,
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
but I will say we
I-
will change it from board of directors to the special election committee or the election committee. Whatever happens, it's
think
going to be
it-
the election committee who does it.
Should be from full membership.
Okay.
Just because of how networked we all are. And, like even if I may not be in a certain a certain time zone, I may know somebody in a time zone who I'm like, oh yeah, that person.
Oh, that's
Or,
true.
ugh, that person.
Yes.
And they will be
That-
involved in decisions that affect the overall membership.
Exactly. So that's why I think it should be open to the entire membership.
Okay, so I'm going to say the election committee shall organize an election will organize an election for, I guess, open to all membership to elect, that's kind of redundant, zone representatives. And then period, I guess.
I feel like we should maybe
Maybe say
change.
to fill. Sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say include the word voting or the verbiage voting.
Yeah, instead of organize.
since
That's a
it's-
good idea. To elect, we
So-
take out. Yep. A vote.
Shall organize a vote open to all membership to elect zone representatives to fill each position.
Relative to the, I'm going to call it a census.
Mhm.
So that means now the election committee, which will have to have like a special separate section for the election committee, will now be in charge of that census of just like who's where, how many people, blah, blah, blah.
Do we want to capitalize the word census to make it like an official term that we can also refer to in the previous one, since we did kind of talk about it previously as well. Like we could
Yeah.
say like herein, and it would herein be referred to as a census.
Yes. Where do you think that would go?
For each this process. Including any members consolidated from you will receive a second zone representative through.
Maybe here.
Recorded via census in that time zone at the conclusion of the terms served.
Or maybe I should have put it up higher actually when we first broached the issue.
Yeah.
Zone.
Like I was thinking like something to the effect of like herein defined as a census. There will be for every zone between 7 to 10 members within their time zone.
We
based
start a new
on-
sentence.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
I was just gonna say we could start a new sentence along the lines of what Ruben was saying. Like it could just be its own sentence that like clarifies.
Yeah.
That's a good idea.
Clarified it.
'Cause that sentence is so freaking long.
Yeah, we don't want to make them any longer.
Should we put it between? Because that way we could actually make these shorter and say, instead of conclusion of the terms, we could say census, at census, they'll have more. Where should we put that sentence? There'll be one zone representative for every zone that has between 7 to 10 members. I guess maybe we should say time. Why don't we just say time zone here? There we go.
Yeah. Yeah.
Should I say herein?
Yeah. Should it be a census or?
Grammatically, it should be a census. Legally, I don't know. So we'll go with the grammatic decision first. Time zone membership will be determined through a process here and referred to as a census.
What is that process?
Yeah, I'm wondering how much I should go into that, I guess.
Should that be its own section?
I think so.
Yeah, but I don't know if it should be an officer since it's part of the election
Oh.
committee's duties.
And another, maybe we have
So I
to-
could just say described in.
Would the board conduct a census?
We'd have to go back and add that in.
Then, yeah, if it's one of their roles, then it would be defined under their powers.
Let's take a look real quick at what their draft says.
Right
Can I
now.
quickly pull it up? Hopefully not.
Yeah, I thought it was like a special elections committee. I didn't realize it was for board members.
It's not for board members. It's a special committee for elections specifically, but technically census could be separate from that election committee.
I
There's
would just
nothing
say
that says-
whoever's responsibility it is, it should be outlined in their section.
Yeah, definitely.
So upholding
Is this
the
the general,
people.
should this be the general membership? I mean, should this be?
So I don't think it should be in board of directors. I think it'll be in a section called committees, probably.
Yeah.
Oh, a census
Um,
committee.
I don't know if it's a big enough task to designate one committee to. Because it'll literally, well, it might get bigger though. I don't know.
It
That
depends
might
on
be-
the size of the organization.
Yeah.
Just for, I mean, I guess for my own sake, like what is the process, what does the census process look like? Just generally, like,
So it'll essentially be, it depends. We could just send out a Google form and have people self-identify. We already know who our active member roster is, and they've been actively kind of updating us. Or what we could do is when we do actually like accept membership dues, we could require that they tell us their time zone.
that's why I was thinking it should be in membership.
Yeah,
That makes sense. It could be collected upon entry.
yeah. So
Any
who would be
update?
looking at those numbers then? Would it be the
Who-
previous group of officers? Would it be the special election, or not special election, the election committee? It's not in the interim board's duties, so they wouldn't be involved, but who would we want to designate that to as a task?
In a lot of organizations, there's a membership coordinator, so who would be kind of analogous to that? that person is in charge of taking the demographics of the membership and things like that.
Mhm. Would they be? Sorry, I'm structuring a sentence in my head.
It's okay.
Would they essentially be the type of person that wouldn't really have any like agency outside of that role? Like they wouldn't really have any duty outside of essentially. taking
Well, it
membership?
depends on the size of the organization, because, you know, if your organization has 14 people, that's not a lot of work. But if your organization has 400 people, like that's one person's job to make sure that like those 400 people are like have someone to reach out to and
Mhm.
things like that.
I think
But I would say
go ahead.
for right now, I really would just put it as one person's job, because they're going to have to be collecting all of the new membership.
Yeah. Well, what my initial kind of inkling for regional representatives was that they would have so the interim board is like a mashup right now of the board of representatives or whatever you want to call it and then the regional representative kind of officer tasks, right? The board members and the officers are kind of smushed into what we're doing right now. I think my question is, are we planning on having volunteers? And I a little bit have an answer to that already. Are we planning on having volunteers outside of the interim board and the officers? And then if so, what will the officers' duties be? Will they be essentially the leadership roles that we've kind of taken on? Or will they have specific duties? Like, for instance, let's say mailing list. We need to have a regional representative that's in charge of the mailing list. They can be self-assigned, but they have to be in charge of that. Or it could be we have a regional representative in charge of the duty of the memberships, you know, and then maybe that's a specific person. I think what we might need to think about is what will be the purview of the officers and what will be the purview of committees. And I think we might need to make like extensive lists for that, you know, because I hesitate to create a new position this early.
Yeah.
That makes
Well, my
sense?
thought is if you do designate it to the zone representatives, then that does keep it from becoming like a monumental task.
Yeah.
Although I know, like, you know, like the time, whatever time zone the East Coast is, will be more crowded than other places, but it does help like permanently like clamp down on the amount of work that position could possibly encompass.
Yeah.
But they would need to possibly have someone on the board that was like individually this is all reported to, just on account of like not making them all talk to each other, you know, not making 20 people talk to each other when they could all communicate one thing to a single person. And the same goes for the mailing list in my mind, that the mailing list could be all of the newsletters could be managed by a single person at the board level, but somebody in the regions communicates like, hey, we would really like to get this open call that's going on in our region onto the newsletter, or we have a specific piece of business, like we are going to hold an election in our zone. Can you put the election on the newsletter because everybody needs to vote on it?
Yeah. My biggest issue with that is that the board is meant to just do financial things right now. We've really stripped them of those kinds of powers. So we'd have to have like a major overhaul of what the board is obligated to do. And then we would also still have the issue of too many tasks for board members. So right now we're all doing at least the work of like 2 positions. And I think it might be better if we actually left that up to the zone representatives. As long as we tell them ahead of time, like, when you are a zone representative, yes, you are representing your zone, but at the same time, you're a representative that's going to have to do things for the guild itself. You know, like there is a certain level of officership that's involved. Like, for instance, it's not quite lateral to having like a president and a vice president and a secretary and everything, but it is kind of trying to flesh those roles out so that they're simultaneously flexible, so that somebody who is like a parent would still be able to be on the regional representatives board, because they could say like, I feel more comfortable just taking on like YouTube, which is a lot of stuff in big chunks of time, but it's not the constant needing to do things that Instagram is, because Instagram is like nonstop. You always have to be doing something.
Every day, yeah.
Yeah. And so I kind of am hoping that the officers in this situation will be able to take on those, at least those leadership roles in those specific areas. And if that's the case, we might want to consider changing the name from zone representatives to just representatives, and then saying that they are nominated by zone, so that it's not misleading people to think that they're only there to represent their zone. I do think officers should have that like closer connection to like being one of the people who's answering emails, being one of the people who's replying to DMs, you know, having that still ground level accessibility. Not ground level, but you know what I mean?
I think we can also, I think we should keep volunteers outside of the, or still allow volunteers outside of the board
Mhm.
and the officers then, because then, you know, an officer who has someone who wants to be involved and is maybe thinking about becoming an officer, but they don't know yet, they can delegate, you know, you love YouTube, like, let's put you on that team.
Yes. And you know, that's a good point too, because we could always say something to the effect of like, I'm going to call it committees for now, just because it's parlance we're used to, but let's say the actual role of the officers is to facilitate committees. So they're expected to be in at least, I don't know if we want to do this, but like at least 2 committees, you know, but to be consistent with those committees and help like organize them and structure them and things like that. Barring like a big life event, in which case, like, you know, it doesn't make sense for us to be like, well, you said you would do this.
Yeah.
You know, but I think I hesitate to get like too specific, but I think the way that I'm thinking of it is there will be like a group of, kind of like what we're doing now, a group of volunteers, and then a slightly higher tier of officers that just have a leadership role within those kind of committees or volunteers to direct that energy. And then the board is like our like daddy big bucks in the background, you know, deciding on financial decisions, making sure that there is some kind of like check and balance with, okay, so the officers have proposed this idea of like, why don't we have, one way to phrase it is like, what if they're bidding for the conference to happen in their region, right?
Mhm.
They'll have to do that towards the board, because the board will be very, very closely in sync with deciding those kinds of decisions, you know? And they'll also have to do that with the help of their members or volunteers. So does that make sense?
Mhm.
Okay, I feel like I'm not making sense.
No, I get the 3 tiers of responsibility being board members and then regional representatives and then having a base of volunteers.
Yeah, and you know, I think we've had a hard time so far with like general volunteers, like giving them activities to do. Part of that's because we're a new organization and we have all these like random new things we have to like think about as we go along. But also I think it's maybe a little bit easier to instead of committees, maybe we call them teams of volunteers, and we add a leadership component to this that talks about the teams. And then instead of having a committee section, we have a team section or something.
I think Teams is very friendly.
Yeah.
I would be very inclined to get on a team versus a committee.
Yeah. That's good.
It's a very accessible word.
Yeah, I've liked it so far because I think it makes it clear, like, you're not going to be the only person in charge of this Instagram post. And like, if you post this and you use a hashtag that somebody takes offense to, it's not just you on the receiving end, you know?
Yes. The team can talk about it together.
Exactly. And if it's necessary, they can bring it to the officer who can, you know, do some kind of demonstrable action there. Whether it's kicking it up higher to the board or, you know, hopefully nobody swears at anybody, but you know.
Nope, no cuss words.
So I think maybe in light of those 3 tiers, is there, let's look at the sections again. Just to see if we're going to be able to address all of that within this section. So we've got vacancies, and then we've got all the individual responsibilities. So I think maybe in these sections where it's talking about each position, instead we should talk about responsibilities and just call it that and go in depth there where we're like, it's a leadership situation. You're also supposed to be able to step in maybe for your team. You're supposed to be organizing the team, creating deadlines. I have heard that a lot in the past couple of weeks. Deadlines are really, really helpful. And I think it's a good idea to have those deadlines coming from somebody involved, you know, but who's also at that, like, not necessarily intermediary level, but at that level where they can say, let me go ask the other, you know, officers what they think, you know. I think that might be a good way to do it. Does that sound good to everybody?
Yes.
Okay. Cool. And then I'm just scrolling down to see if there's like an example of committees, and it doesn't feel like there is. I don't remember seeing one, but oh, right, it's right here. So committees was in the board of directors. So we're going to have to move that down and say teams instead. So maybe that will get moved to this section, if that makes sense.
That makes sense.
Okay. Okay, cool. Is there anything we need to go back and change in light of that? Should we change the name of the zone representatives to just representatives?
I still like zone representatives.
I do too.
I just think it sounds really fun.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it really, go ahead.
I agree. Zone, we should keep zone representatives. Representative sounds a little too
Dry.
and I don't know, like vague. Representative of what, you know?
Okay.
Especially since we're kind of stripping some of the like titles, you know, from that.
Yeah.
But now we're, with those titles, obviously we're responsibilities. Now we're fleshing those out in different ways, but yeah.
Okay. Okay, cool. So let's do, we're a little bit through this. As far as election goes, the election committee shall organize a vote open to all membership to elect zone representatives to fill each position relative to the census. Each officer shall hold office from the first day of the fiscal year. Do we want to do it with the fiscal year? What are you doing? Sorry, lots of tongue noises. Hold on. I think he ate a piece of trash, but we'll find out. He's been
Yeah,
very,
it'll keep the fiscal year like more relevant to the membership instead of just being like a random date. And also it allows them to like have a good deadline for proposing budgets to be like introduced for the next fiscal year in terms of like their actual term time period.
Yeah. Okay.
They can actually campaign by saying like things they want to do with the budget and then actually be able to introduce that.
Mhm. Yeah, within a reasonable time frame. I think that's a very good idea. They also say, or immediately upon election, if such election occurs. So basically special elections.
Special elections.
I think that's a good idea just in case. Until the last day of the fiscal year, are we going to do just 1 year? Or are they going to serve for the same amount of time as the board, which I think we had like 2 years on for that.
I would like to give them the same amount of time as the board because I feel like having to, if the board has like longer terms, then they can have more power in that sense.
Yeah. And I don't want that. I'd rather people who are actively representing, you know. And we can always add a place for impeachment here as well. So let me add that to the list because I don't know if that's in the original articles. What a buzzword, right?
Really?
So until the last day of the second fiscal year or until their death, resignation, I think that's important to include, retirement, removal, disqualification. Maybe we should call it removal instead of impeachment. Well, removal makes it sound like one person is doing it. I don't like that. I'd rather it be impeachment. What do y'all think?
I'm fine with that.
Yep.
I feel like impeachment is a process and removal is just kind of like, get out of here.
Yeah. And I think that language went more with the fact that the previous officers were appointed, not elected. All right, so until their death, resignation, retirement, impeachment, or disqualification, if such occurs before the first day of the second fiscal year, or until their successor has been elected and qualified. So if, you know, something happens with the elections and we have to somehow have a runoff, which I find hard to imagine, but anything's possible, they'll continue to serve in that point of, you know, a position until that election is concluded. If necessary to, nope.
Second, yeah, I was gonna say, should second fiscal years be following fiscal year?
I think following might be confusing. Because it'll sound like the first day of the fiscal year. Well, maybe, I don't know. Is that confusing to y'all?
Second is just, it's been tripping me up as I'm rereading it. I think I understand what it is, but I have to do, my brain has to do some like assuming.
Mhm.
What about like second, or let's see, the second term year?
Hmm.
Oh, you mean, but that's, second is referring to second of the term of the board, right? Because the board is 2, right?
There too also.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Their
so-
terms match.
Yeah, okay, never mind.
That's what I was trying to communicate, is it'll be the second fiscal year after the first day of the fiscal year.
Yeah, I was
So I think
confused.
what it is the clause here. This weird conjoining comma is causing problems. So what we will do instead is say, officers shall hold office from the first day of the fiscal year until the last day of their Does the following convey that properly?
I don't think so.
Okay. Last day of the next.
Or like 2 consecutive fiscal years or something. I don't know.
Until the first day of the 2 consecutive that's a tough one.
It's
Two
weird.
consecutive fiscal, yeah.
I think that conveys that it begins on the first day of the fiscal year. They just decided to write that
Yeah,
wildly.
I think you're right. Yeah, the first day is what I think is like messing me up as well.
Yeah.
So let's say, or immediately upon election, if such election occurs until the last day of the second. Does that help with second now? Now that we know
Yes.
there are 2? Okay.
Yes.
Or until their death, resignation, retirement, etc. Okay. If necessary to fill offices that have become vacant, the board may elect officers. The board can never elect officers. So, no.
Would that just be then in that case, a special election?
Yeah, I think what we can just say is the election committee can hold, how would you phrase that? Special election if necessary. Oh, what's the word?
Preeminent? Preemptive.
Preemptively, I think, vacated seat. Is that correct? I also don't know if I need to say preemptively with a dash. It's like an early vacated seat, but that's not the right word either.
I don't think it is preemptive.
Maybe
Okay.
unexpected.
Premature.
Thank
Premature.
you. That's
There
what
it
it
is.
was.
That's the one, yeah.
Prematurely vacated seat.
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you. So
Finally
it's
got
called a
there.
special election if necessary to fill a prematurely vacated seat. Did I interrupt someone? I'm sorry.
No, I was just excited for myself that I finally got to that word.
I'm excited as well. Okay, so are we ready to move on to section 3? All right, let's do it. So section 3 is, oh, well, that's for vacancies. So we didn't even need to do what we just did. Okay. Why is it so small now? That's 10.5.
Oh, I raised the font size and everything because when I was
Oh,
copying,
okay. I did not notice.
I think I did it while you were,
Gone.
yeah. Because I was like, oh, this is so tiny. Let me increase this so everyone can see.
Thank you for doing that. This is fine, but just in case. Okay. So vacancy is the term of office of any office. That's cute. Shall terminate upon the election and qualification of a successor or upon the effective date of his or her resignation submitted in writing to the secretary, no, just to the general board of directors. Upon his or her death or upon a vote of, this is the impeachment section, I guess, or upon a vote of 2/3 of the directors, so no, then in office to remove him or her from office if in their judgment, the best interests of the organization will be served thereby. So here's another one.
Oh. I was just quietly doing that in the background.
No, I appreciate it.
It's effective of their resignation.
Thank you. I think this whole thing might actually have to go or be broken down. This part for sure is going to have to be removed so that we can describe impeachment instead. And actually, this next sentence also should be removed, but we'll do that in a moment. So this first portion is vacancies. The term of office of any office shall terminate upon the election and qualification of a successor. Like, that's true. We don't need to change that. It's the same for the board as well. Or upon the effective date of their resignation, submitted in writing to the board of directors, I think is still a good thing to do. Or upon their death. Because upon their death just means they can only resign when they die.
I know, I was like looking at that. I
It's
was like,
intense.
If you die, you need to send us a letter about it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Please formally resign following your death.
Oh, that's literally posthumous. Sorry. I'm so sorry I made a joke about the post. Anyway, so any vacancy among the officers shall be filled by the board of directors. That also won't be true. But let's talk first about removal or impeachment. Should we have a separate section for impeachment, or should we just put it in with vacancies?
What did we do in the boards for the board members?
Let's look.
I think it should be a mirror of the structure at least, and a very similar process.
I agree with you.
so we only talk about it, and I've already made the move from combined 5 and 7. So 5 has the vacancies and interim directors.
Okay. So vacancies may be filled through special election process. An unanticipated vacancy opens on the board. I am just going to copy and paste this
I think that's a good idea.
because that's also in our vacancies section.
Yeah.
I'm going to paste it down here so we can kind of stitch them together. So let's cut that out and remove this corresponding statement.
The only thing is that in the board, we don't actually have a impeachment process laid out.
Yes.
Like, we don't have that word, I don't think mentioned at all.
Should the impeachment process be like part of the membership, like the outline for the membership, since it'll be like everyone participates?
Maybe it might go in wherever we're going to outline the election committee. They might be the ones that we put in charge of holding that impeachment vote.
Are we
That
basing
makes
that?
sense.
Yeah, like, is that based on article, the following article, miscellaneous provisions, or no?
Yeah, I think we might put them in miscellaneous provisions
Okay.
because they're separate from just being volunteers. They're separate from the board. They're separate from officers. So I think they might just be miscellaneous provisions.
Well, and then just like we've kind of introduced like census, I think like impeachment probably should be capitalized and
Mhm.
included somewhere.
Yeah.
We'll probably have to
agree.
go retroactively add that into the board.
Where is that? There it is. I also think, so we've said this whole time, on every vote and everything, that this is all subject to revision and input by legal counsel. So the legal counsel will probably tell us which words we should go with that are more appropriate. But I do think it's a good idea for us to just keep them and let it kind of be kind of habble scrabble as we come up with terms, so that we can kind of talk to that person and be like, we came up with this, but we're not sure,
Yeah, tell us what to write.
What's an equivalent term or the more appropriate term, or etc. And they'll definitely iron out the inconsistencies if we can pay them to do that.
And I feel like it makes sense to have it in the miscellaneous, especially because we will need officers and board members to be impeachable. We will also need to impeach members, possibly.
Yeah.
So it applies to all levels.
Yes. And potentially volunteers as well. So in the event that an unanticipated vacancy opens in the board, the election committee, so that's the word we used, was unanticipated. So instead of board, we'll just say unanticipated vacancy opens. The election committee in office at the time shall conduct a special election that requires voting from the membership. I feel like they've turned into our Supreme Court. Like, we're like, you can do that. In the event that an unanticipated vacancy opens on the board, the election committee we did that. Whichever nominee gains the plurality, the newly elected directors will serve the same term. Yeah, so basically all of that, we could just go ahead and put that right there. Any officer or assistant officer may also be removed from office by the membership. We don't have a chair.
They're all appointing authority.
Yeah. You guys they can just yeet any of us out the window. Any officer or assistant officer may also be removed from office by the membership upon such terms as have been specified in writing at the time of the election of such officer. I think we should be a little bit more specific here, maybe. Maybe instead of saying at the time of the election of such officer, we should just say as have been specified in special or the election committee section so that we don't have to retype that. What do y'all think?
I think that makes sense. I mean, it also makes sense to me that the election committee handles impeachment on account of they would then have to put together a separate election committee to fill the spot, you know? Then it's all just kind of, there's a lot of continuity.
Yeah. I guess is how we could phrase it. Okay. That
And
election
we could put the
committee.
number later,
Yeah,
add back in the numbers to reference things up and down.
I'm gonna highlight that so we don't forget.
Yeah, there's a couple things, like when we say impeachment, we could go back and specifically put the number of where that exists later. That tends to help. I don't know what it is about me, but it helps people like me to like digest these articles, to be able to go, okay, I know exactly where to go if I want clarity on this.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I agree with you. I also like that. It can kind of be laid out that way. I was watching, I don't know if any of you guys have watched Hilda, but there's an episode where she's like learning how to be a witch. And there's a book that says, see footnote about 10 different times. And that I think is kind of how you can describe legalese to people who've never had to write it. It's just a bunch of see this, see that, as per this. Okay. Is there anything else we should add to this section? I am going to format it differently.
I think we have to change some of the, whichever nominee gains the plural vote is elected to the board of directors.
Whichever nominee gains it. Yep, you're right.
It still all refers to the board of directors instead of the zone representatives. The newly elected representatives will serve during the same term as the representatives elected from the And then it says previous board members, and I think that's the last time it says it.
Oh my gosh. Linguistically, this isn't accurate, but I'm whatever. Technically, it should be this in parentheses, but we're gonna let it go. And we will have a lawyer tell us if there's something wrong with that. Because I don't know how else to say plural and non-plural.
Plural and possessive and non-plural possessive.
Yeah. Especially if it's in a parenthetical. Do I just put this at the end?
That is a toughie.
So any officer or assistant officer may also be removed based on that. So cool.
Here, I have a fix. I know what it is. Just move term.
There we go.
Previous term of the representatives.
Mhm.
There we go. Now it's possessive. Thank you.
You're welcome.
English is weird. Any office or yeah. So I think that's it, right? We can move on to the big boy section. We've only got about 15 minutes left. So this is going to be the section that we called, oh, wrong thing. The section that we called responsibilities, I think is what we called it before. This is going to be a big section.
And
Oh my gosh.
I think the board section can also help us to draft this.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe we should call this. Should we format it like this?
I like the included but not limited to.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. So I'm going to copy this. I don't know if we want to call it general powers.
I think responsibility sounds better for
Yeah.
this section.
Yeah, because this is more about being a representative. The board is more about being a banker.
Yeah.
You know, so to speak. Okay. So instead of the property, business, and affairs, should we just say the affairs? Affairs. What
So-
about affairs, organization, and trying to think of what else we do as interim board members. Affairs and
Well,
leadership. Go ahead.
will they have any control over any finance? No? Okay.
But they will share that kind of responsibility for affairs.
Mhm.
So
I
unless
think
that
that's
makes
good.
anybody uncomfortable, I don't know.
Well, we've limited the board to just that, and we've set up really good board election and removal processes, so I think it's fine.
So leadership is a component of these positions, affairs, which will be like I said before, proposing certain activities. So for instance, these guys would be the ones who are in charge of like making sure that like a book club went off without a hitch. So that would be their version of affairs. That's also organization. So leadership. I wonder if is there anything else, Ruben, Kay, that y'all can think of that we've been doing?
It's kind of hard to parcel out since we're also doing like officer or, we're doing like all of it. So it's a little hard. I think just like being like making it clear that, communication is like super important and they need to just be like available for that. But that might be like too specific.
I don't know
Yeah.
if that's, oh, go
Yeah.
ahead.
I was just gonna say, yeah, and the establishment of like deadlines and, you know, that communication. Yeah, I
I
agree.
feel that's very leadership oriented.
So maybe what oh, am I unmuted? Yeah, okay. So maybe what we say is, this is our general like umbrella, and then we get those more specific things in the bottom. So like communication would be like A, deadlines would be like B, you know,
Yeah,
loosey goosey like that.
that's good.
Okay.
When we have a big, like a really large, you know, amount of zone representatives, how are we delegating those responsibilities? Like, do like 3 representatives take on Instagram, or, you know, like, because like the way we have it now is like, you know, for instance, I'm doing YouTube and mailing, right? So like, how do, I guess like, yeah, how do we delegate the responsibilities to the individuals?
Yeah, I think it should be evenly spread out whenever possible.
Right.
And
Because you
I'm,
said Instagram is so hard.
yeah, if possible, it would be great if well, I have mixed feelings on this, but it would be nice for the individuals involved if they were just doing one team at a time, you know, instead of the overlap. We're doing it now just because we stepped up to do it. But I do think like having somebody dedicated to the mailing list, or we could even just call it a communication group, having somebody committed to social media as we get bigger, or a group of people committed to social media. I think that might be something we revisit as we grow. You know, like if it's not working anymore, we should revisit it. But that does bring up an interesting question of like, should we cap off the number of regional representatives or zone representatives? Sorry.
That's just, yeah, that's the thing that like I'm like, I can't wrap my head around completely, you know, because what if there ends up being, you know, 10? You know, it's like, how do you divide that?
What if we put a clause in this that's like legally binding where we like require revision of this if you pass a certain number of representatives?
You can, there can be provisions that the bylaws need to be reviewed X number of years. Like every 2 years, we need to review the bylaws and repass the bylaws to make sure that they still fit the organization.
And I think we've done something like that here. I cannot remember, so I'm going to see if I can
I
find
was gonna
it.
say, I feel like I remember that being a big conversation when we talked about board of directors. We may not have expressly,
Well, and this is also not like formatted. I wonder if I opened like an old version of this.
oh, you know what it is? I just increased the size on that of the font. And so I bet when it copied over from a PDF, it did that. I can go back in and fix all that.
Okay, please do.
Yeah, let me do that.
Oh, we already have a provision for committees here as well. So we should also put something in here about committees being created. Maybe, I don't know. I don't know if this looks unedited, which is confusing to me. Real quick, I'm going to stop sharing and open the vote because I am a little bit befuddled. But feel free to like keep going while I do that.
Oh.
So I think the last part we were at was talking about whether or not we should limit the overall number.
Just real quick, I'm going to look at a map of the time zones.
Because we have a cap on the number of people we, yeah, that's a good idea, looking at a map of time zones. Mhm. Double check. Yep, we have a sense. So yeah, they can initiate the creation of committees. Okay, so the board can create committees, but I don't know if we want the officers to be able to create committees as well. So that's something else we'll want to kind of consider.
There are 24 time zones.
24.
Yes.
Well, that's a lot. So what I will say to that, because that is a lot, it seems like a lot right now, but we are kind of operating at minimum capacity right now, like minimum programming. Most programming we have going on right now is like Instagram. So what we may end up doing is we have somebody else, like I know SGCI and I think MAPC both have like webmasters as a position. So we may have somebody who does like the web-based programming and is in charge of that group of volunteers. We might later have somebody who's in charge of specifically book clubs. Or we might have several people who are in charge of like different categories of programming as we go along.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe we'll just have to keep that in mind and try to write vague. I don't know how y'all feel about that, but that's kind of my inclination.
There could be, again, one of those footnotes of like, as the number of zone representatives increases, you know, tasks can be defined within the bylaws at that time for, you know, for that set of ratification, you know. That being said, I did look it up. France has the most time zones, and then the second most is United States and Russia.
It's wild that France has the most.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
didn't
for-
expect that one.
Yeah, but they do stretch like all the way into Belgium. So
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so teams and committees. We're gonna have to kind of decide how we measure out our language comparing those two. Or we could just change committees on the board bylaws to teams if you would like. See if that's voted on in the affirmative. Pumpkin, you are making so much noise. Go away.
Can you repeat that?
Yeah. So I think we're going to have to go back into teams and committees as well, because I was just looking at, let me share my screen again. I was
Back in
just
board.
looking at the board of directors bylaws, and they do have committees here.
Yeah.
So one thing we might have to do is like see, because we talked about having teams instead. We're going to have to think about like what the difference is between a committee and a team, or if there is a difference with the exclusion of the election committee, you know, how do we
Maybe
kind
we
of,
could have like ad hoc committees, because I've been thinking about this as well, and it feels like I really like teams and I'd like to stick with teams, but I also think that like ad hoc committees are really important, or maybe like not necessarily like always defined, but necessary. So maybe they can be like two separate things, if that's okay, rather than trying to like mush them into one. So I'm thinking like in the case of like investigating things or like more lighthearted things, obviously would be like, you know, heading like the book club, like you said. But I wouldn't see that as like a team in the beginning. Maybe it's an ad hoc committee and then it turns into a team or something.
Yeah, I just put a link in the chat. I mean, I can't attest to this website, so I don't know, like, it came up immediately on Google, but committees and teams are defined as two very different things, it looks like.
And I can definitely see there being something that's an Instagram team, a social media team, but a committee and the level like of accountability expected of a committee, applying more to things like elections and impeachments and
Mhm.
something with gravity in the name is sometimes necessary.
Yeah. So the difference, and this is reading from the website, the difference of a team from a committee can be understood when committees are defined. Committees are usually administrative, hands-on organizationally, often spend much time deciding if something needs to be done, in quotes, are heavily involved in decision-making, typically overseers of all things. Committees offer a service, create a situation where team strategy is applied. Sounds like, though, the reason that we like teams, though, is because if you look at the chart, teams does kind of align more with our vision of the group.
But I also see what Kay is saying. There may be times when a committee just needs to happen where it's like, okay, we need to, I'm trying to think of like a specific moment, but like conference, right? I don't know if I would feel comfortable leaving the conference up to teams. I think teams are more about everyday maintenance, whereas maybe we have conference or committees for events. You know what I mean? Like one-time large events. And I think that might have been our original intention in giving the board that ability, because the board would essentially have advocated to create a committee to handle some of the money.
Yeah.
With that. So maybe we keep both. And
Yeah.
maybe what we do is we say the board can create committees and the officers can create teams.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that helps kind of evenly distribute the responsibilities. Like, we're not just giving the board another thing to do by managing committees and teams.
You know, that's kind of what we did anyways as interim board. We just all kind of stepped up and we're like, this needs to be done. Who's taking it on? You know.
I have a question about that. So my understanding is that officers will be like maybe more in touch with like day to day and like what needs to be done. So if the officers see the need for a committee, would they have to like convince the board or advocate for a committee? And if so, or if not, I mean, is that a problem at all to anybody?
Well, the
think-
point,
Mhm,
pardon.
Go ahead.
The point of the officers in my mind is to bring like the general membership's concern to the board. And I feel like if there is a problem like that, it would be their responsibility to communicate it to the board and say, hey, we need to form a committee. We have many members who are worried about this.
And then so what do we do in the case where the board says no?
So what I actually am thinking
Right.
is they both have the ability to create committees. So let's say what you're saying is happening. I think it is a good idea for them to be able to just create a committee. And it could literally be for something where it's like, this isn't going to cost any money. There's no reason to get the board involved, but we do need a committee to kind of organize this.
Yeah.
I think it's a good idea for us to just say, like, literally almost copy and paste the committee section from the board of directors so they have the same power there. because they're going to need committees for different things, you know?
We can give them the exact same amount of power. Like they can both
Exactly.
create committees, they can both create teams.
That's true. I don't know why the board would need teams, though. That's my only.
Yeah, it's hard to think of a situation, but maybe.
I mean, it does seem like the board would be more inclined to be coming up with committees, and committee would be a rare thing in the officers section. But we want to at least be able to give them that ability to do that, so they have that autonomy.
Yeah.
If they never really need it, but it's there,
Right.
it does also suggest that they have even levels of power. Like the board is not more powerful.
That's why I brought up my example, because I was worried about the idea of the board having too much power, and that what like happens when there's that abuse.
Yeah. And I also think, you know, we're actively trying to keep them on that same level where it is the same group of people essentially working together for 2 years, navigating whatever changes together for 2 years. They should have that equal level of power, because 2 years is a great time to develop like a lot of kinship, a lot of good communication, but it's also a great amount of time to nurse grudges. So I do think it's a good idea to have that ability to say like, okay, you know, we all have the ability to create committees. So,
Yeah.
you know, you can't create a committee to try and flex on us, you know.
Yeah.
And I also think that's, you know, necessary. I don't remember what our language was there. Let's see.
I'm
Shall
laughing.
consist
This
of-
website is a Christian resource.
Oh, hey, so here's this statement here that makes it make more sense for officers to be able to create committees. If a committee is created, excluding any independent committees like the election committee, it shall consist of at least one member of the board, one officer, which we need to go back in there and change officer to zone representative.
Yeah.
And consist of no fewer than 5 members. So I think that's also a good reason to kind of lift it and put it in there. I also can see why we might want to have teams, but I worry that if we give, and this might be like cynical of me, but if we give the board the ability to create teams, then the board won't have much to do, you know, if they're starting to delegate their tasks that way.
I mean, it seems like the board's idea of a team is the officers and the membership.
Right. Yeah.
That's like
And
enough of a team for them.
for them, they need to have more official groupings, I think, to enact their will, because they are managing our money. So they need to be a little bit more culpable in that way. You know what I mean? And a little bit more visible too. Okay, so we'll add committees, but we'll do that in a minute. I did make a note for that. And then back to their responsibilities. So we've got leadership of the guild shall be overseen by, should I say by its officers? Or should I say by the zone representatives? In accordance, probably zone representatives, because that's their technical term.
Yeah. I actually just went and changed all of
Officers to zone representatives.
in the board bylaws.
Thank you.
Yeah.
In accordance with these bylaws, the board is responsible for overall policy. Again, I guess it's abbreviated here, so the representatives responsible for overall policy and direction of the organization. So, oh, we missed a guild then. Hold on.
Where?
In this section of vacancy, nope, of responsibilities. What did I copy paste? This.
Wait.
Right up here, organization.
Oh,
I know, I'm just leaving notes, sorry.
That's all right.
Unresolved notes.
And I do have to head out. My ride is here. Can't afford to park at my own school. So,
Oh, I
I
know
totally
that.
get it.
yep.
Okay, I think this is probably going to be our last section, and we might not get all the way through it, Chelsea. So I will send you like a message on Discord to reschedule or schedule
Alright.
another meeting.
Yeah, for our next meeting.
Yes.
All right. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
I
Okay, so I think if we clean this language up a little bit, the three of us have had a lot of experience with everything, honestly. But I think that'll help us kind of parse out what should and shouldn't be board or officer. So let's see. Leadership of the guild shall be overseen by its own representatives in accordance with these bylaws. Cool. The representatives are responsible for overall policy and direction. I don't know if that's the right phrase. Should we say for actions? That seems like a great way to get them sued.
Yeah. Responsible.
Maybe what we should, oh, hey, it's right here. Responsibility for day-to-day operations to the officers. So we could literally just truncate that sentence.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Specific powers of the board of directors include, again, we'll take that out. Include but are not limited to. So this is the part where we're just gonna have to bang them out. This will stay. And we'll change this to alongside the board of directors. This will get removed. So the language of this just needs to change.
Should that one just be proposing impeachment?
Right? But I want to be specific still, because like,
Yeah.
you know. Okay, got you, Kay.
Got you, Kay.
Proposing fellow representative or board removals, reviewing and approving. So we're not doing that at all in this level. Support raising financial blah, blah, blah. And this is coordinated with the officers. So we'll say coordinated with the board and establishing. So we won't be establishing general fundraising policies.
Mm-hmm. We can just say as coordinated with the, as coordinated and laid out, or never mind. I don't know how to, I was just thinking about like just making sure it's clear that the board is the one deciding what those policies are.
I see what you mean.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can figure that out later.
Well, and also I like the vagueness because it kind of might keep the board on its toes because they're not necessarily doing it by themselves.
Yeah.
Especially since they're zone representatives, they should be like, that doesn't work for me.
Yeah.
So this essentially
Especially.
means they have to meet with the board during that, you know?
Yeah. There's not any concern about state laws that vary that could impede.
No, the state laws are entirely the board's responsibility.
Okay.
I think it felt kind of clear in the document, but I'm not a legal person. So
yeah, I was just worried if there was like state laws that differed in North Carolina versus if somebody was in California or
Not as far as that, mostly as far as money. I think the
Okay.
laws are mostly about like taxes.
Okay, cool.
Like obviously we can't like not report a hate crime,
Yeah.
like we have to do that. But,
So the zone reps then they're bound by North Carolina, like funding law, like money laws and whatnot,
yeah, the board is like end of story, like they have to pay taxes to North Carolina.
Yeah.
I mean, we can always reincorporate somewhere else. I think MAPC reincorporated somewhere else, and they just put a stipulation across their bylaws that said it was SGCI. This was previously incorporated to South Carolina. It is now incorporated to Delaware.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. And then conducting a biennial review of that. I don't think this should be something.
Could they assist?
Maybe. I think that would be too many cooks in the kitchen, in theory.
So you're saying that's one that should stay, that review should be strictly the board?
I think I can see it going both ways though, because that might cause, we lost Kay. That might cause some problems. Should we say, I don't know if conducting is the right word though, maybe participating, contributing to?
Contribute, I like contribute. Because I do feel like welcome back, Kay. Because I do feel like I wouldn't want the board to be the end all be all voice of that review.
Yeah.
The representatives should have they would probably want a very strong say in what that review reflects.
Mm-hmm. I agree with you. As far as conducting the vote of the membership on revisions at any level to the bylaws, I do think that has to be board specific.
Okay.
So.
That's fine.
Okay. In between all of that, so this again is the day-to-day operations. So this is going to be a lot, but simultaneously not much. So I think one thing we should really flesh out is what we mean by leadership and what we mean by organization. So.
Well, here, because these ones we know for sure are going to be our thing.
Mm-hmm.
So then we can get rid of the other ones. Move these all up. And then everything past this point is leadership.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wait. Oh, God. Oh, I was hoping that would auto fix. Guess not.
Oh, probably because it's copy pasted.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay.
Okay. So I would like to hear your phrasing of it because I am going to get too into the weeds because I always get too into the weeds when I talk about what we do. Because I like start reminding myself of things.
Yeah.
So
I would say, well, do we want to put like all communications between the mailing list and Instagram? Like, do we just combine that all into one, like manage communications?
I think I want to be vague actually as to the actual like teams that they're in charge of.
Mm-hmm.
And instead say like a couple of things that came up were like deadlines. I think we should maybe think about like saying leadership in terms of teams where it's just like, what we're doing now essentially is one person is in 2 teams at a time.
Mm-hmm.
And so instead of saying that, we would say, leadership roles assumed in at least one team throughout their term, I guess. But like communicating deadlines was a big thing. Communication in general was a big thing. I think Kay mentioned that, though I don't remember their like phrasing for it. I know I just threw a bunch of things at you. I'm sorry.
No. That's all right. So if I guess we want to keep it vague, we can change that later. Take on leadership. I'm just kind of spitting it out.
Should we say leadership positions? Would that make it more clear where it's like, this is the person?
Yeah, taking on leadership positions.
Thank you. Maybe we should add something about the teams to that, and then maybe section 5 will like detail teams and what we mean by that. So maybe saying
taking on a leadership position that aid in the guild's mission.
Taking on leadership positions within teams, I think is a good way to phrase it, that aid in the guild's mission. That way we don't get too prescriptive.
Mm-hmm. So like that?
Mm-hmm. Perfect. And I like the inclusion of established, which also, you know, brings to my brain the ability to suggest new teams.
Yeah. So it could be established, comma, what's the, not predetermined, but like pre-made.
All I can think of is prefabricated, pre-existing. We could always
pre-existing and proposed.
Maybe we should say extant. Both extant and proposed.
Okay, how does that sound? Taking on leadership positions through established, both extant and proposed team. Oh, wait, hang on, let me, because that's just weird. Taking on leadership positions through established teams, both extant and proposed, that aid in the guild's mission.
Okay, I think that sounds good. Although now I'm not sure if established makes sense anymore, if we're talking about things that already exist and things that are proposed.
Through determined? Because it needs to, they need to be stated, right? Like the reps need to be able to say like,
I'm in charge of this team.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think what we should say is through named teams. I don't know. Maybe we should just say through teams and then get more specific within teams.
Okay.
And maybe we should get numerical too, where we say taking on at least one leadership position. Or through at least one team. I'm not sure which is more what we're looking for, you know?
So each representative taking on one leadership position.
And I think it's okay if somebody wants to take on more than one, but they need to at least take on one.
Taking on at least one leadership position.
Mm-hmm.
Or it could be taking on a leadership position or positions, A.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Taking on a.
And then a little parenthetical S.
Yeah. within, right? Because that's the
Mhm.
proper, through is, doesn't make sense.
Yeah, and within makes it sound like inclusion.
Yeah.
You know,
Taking on a
inclusion.
leadership position or positions within teams, both extant and proposed, that aid in the guild's mission. Okay.
Okay. And then what else do we do? Um, so
So
communication
this one,
line.
yeah, okay, so communication, communicating, would that be managing communication,
Mm.
communication channels?
I think maybe instead of, because that makes it sound like they're all in charge of like Discord. You know what I mean? Maybe instead of managing, we say maintaining sustained communication. I don't know. I want to make it really clear to them that like this needs to be continual communication. You have to talk to everybody at least once a week, you know?
Yeah.
And if you're taking that time off, you can say I'm taking this time off, but that's still communicating.
Yeah. Sustaining clear communication
Mm-hmm.
between other zone reps, the board, or do you just say all of the guild?
I think it's good to list it so that they
Okay.
understand who they need to work with.
Sustaining clear communication between the board, other zone representatives,
Other teams, committees, and I guess also within their own team. Are you gonna make dinner?
Sustaining clear communication between the board, other zone representatives, teams, committees, membership.
Okay. Committees and membership. So maybe we say first within their own team, or do you feel like that's redundant with leadership? I don't know. Communication, I think, needs to really be pushed here.
Should this one be like higher up?
No, I think it's okay to be listed kind of lower,
Okay.
but I do think we really need to like emphatically be like, you got to talk to people. You need to check your, Discord or phone or whatever. I don't want to tie us down to Discord, but
Yeah. I wish we could just say, you got to talk to people.
yeah, once a week, talk to everyone.
Yeah.
And then, maybe that's something we can do in the next one. So this is sustaining clear communication between the board, other zone representatives, team committees, and membership. The next one could be clearly not, that's redundant, but essentially like communicating within the teams that they are leaders of about deadlines and direction. I guess maybe we could say directing. That might be a better way to phrase that. Directing. Well, no, that just sounds like leadership positions. I'm sorry, I'm really wishy-washy.
No, it's okay. I'm the same way.
Establishing consistent routines, deadlines, and lines of communication within their team. I don't know if lines is the word. We could just say communication.
Establishing consistent routines, deadlines, and communication
within
specific
I think, I don't know how to phrase it, like their teams, like it's the team that they're taking on. But their team is very vague and yet weirdly specific.
And the specific team ascribed to the individual zone representative. Is
Yeah,
that
I think that's good.
okay?
I think that's the biggest thing is like, you gotta like clockwork. Because if we go back up, I mean, it's about the day-to-day tasks. So
Yeah.
I feel like that communicates our day-to-day, you know, that's our main leadership thing is we need to like give people deadlines, communicate with them, keep them in consistent routines. That's the biggest thing right now in Instagram. We've also in Instagram started assigning volunteers to certain activities. I don't know if that's something that every team is going to want to do or that will work with every leadership style. But I thought I would say something about it now, just as like, maybe it's something that we put down.
Should it be establishing then consistent and appropriate?
Oh, you know what? We could say consistent roles, routines. Is that, well,
Roles, routines.
yeah. Or do you feel like it's sufficiently addressed by routines? Because that essentially, like, for instance, Tuan has taken over Meet Our Members. So she's going to like she has a routine of every Friday posting the Meet Our Members.
Yeah.
Maybe we don't need to say roles at all. Well, roles is good still.
I'm going to go ahead and add in appropriate.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
So that way it can be reflective of like, you know,
I see what you're
what
saying.
you just kind of said.
Yeah, because the YouTube, that doesn't make sense. You're mostly doing CCs. It would be weird to just be like, okay, one person do CCs while the rest of us make designs, you know?
Well, I think YouTube can grow over time, you know, because one of
Yeah.
the things I do remember was we were talking about like the creation of online demos and interviews, you know, like maybe eventually Meet Our Member when we get somebody who's like for 2 years really good on video or something, you know.
Yeah, interviews. Yeah, so I think that's all a really good way to put it. And also saying appropriate lets it grow like that, you know?
Yeah.
Okay, so I don't know. Is there anything other than that that you want to like thoroughly express to people that you've not run into, but that you've been doing or yeah.
I think do something about publicity and publicizing in some way, talking about it, outreach. And this is kind of what I was thinking about with like, you know, the mailing lists, the newsletters, just like trying to get like new members and whatnot. Yeah, that's just something that I'm like thinking about. So like something about promoting.
I like the term outreach because I think maybe promoting and outreach, between the two, promoting is probably the closest to what we're doing right now because promoting covers Meet Our Members. It covers us reaching out to individuals to ask them about Takeover Tuesdays. It covers us like posting consistently on Instagram. It covers the mailing list and investigating those new technologies. Like I think maybe let's say either promoting or like, I don't want to say mass communication because like there's too many things hidden within that term and we're not necessarily doing all of those things. And I don't want to start a fight between the board and officers on like who does interviews, you know?
Oh, right.
Yeah, so I don't want to do mass communication in that way, but I think maybe promotion is like more encompassing without being that broad, you know?
Mhm.
So maybe we say promoting guild activities and member benefits. Yeah. And then I'm not sure where to put the like maintaining a roster of members, but I think that's also kind of encompassed in the daily activities, and it might not necessarily be officers forever that are doing that, you know?
Yeah.
So I think, because that's one thing that I've been doing a lot is like checking to see active membership, but that's because we have like a weird janky system right now. And I think it'll be easier once we have like actual membership dues.
Yeah.
Pumpkin, stop. I think, do you think this is a good place to stop for now?
Yeah, I was actually just about to say that.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
fantastic, because I'm going to stop recording then.
Okay. We can pick this back up.
Yeah, I think we'll revisit this. I think it'll also be good to have like our fresh minds and then also fresh eyes on it.
Yeah.